April showers bring May flowers is not typically what you would expect for the Southeast, but this year we saw plenty of April showers. Jeff, Chris, and I will talk about this and more in the April 30th edition of the Water Resources Outlook. So now let's take a look at the normal rainfall for this time of year. And here's what you usually see in April. And as you can see, we're pretty dry down in Florida. And as you move further north, we're still into the winter recharge season as you go through Georgia into Alabama and Mississippi. So in Mississippi, as high as somewhere between 5 and 6 inches of rain they receive on a normal basis. And then as we move to May, which we're headed to right now, things start to change just a little bit. We start to get a little bit more rain in there, a tiny bit more convective. The heavier rain tends to move to the north, but as you can see down in South Florida, we really start to see that sea breeze and that summertime convective season, wet season starts there. And then as we move into June, you see it really come into force, where we see most of the rainfall down in Florida and along the coasts, and then that pop-up type thunderstorm stuff we see throughout the rest of the Southeast, which will be around through the rest of the summer. Now let's let Jeff talk about the normals as far as stream flow in our climatology.
Okay, so how's the river flood season going? Well, as you can see, when we look at the river flood climatology, or what is typical, we see that we are in the final couple of weeks of the typical spring river flood season for the Southeast U.S. Currently, we are in week 18 of the year, and we have about 5 river floods ongoing right now in the Southeast, which is just about what we would expect. Now, as you can see, we are heading into the quiet period as far as river flooding. This doesn't mean we'll not have river flooding. It just means the likelihood of widespread river flooding will become greatly diminished typically. We generally tend to see isolated river flooding during the summer months. This is the case up until the late summer and fall, when tropical systems can bring about widespread heavier rains and thus widespread river flooding.
So now that we've seen what's normal, here's what we've actually had over the last 30 days, and this is for the month of April, and this is a departure from normal, and those blues and the purples are all above normal. So in some spots, through Georgia, Alabama, through the little bit of the panhandle of Florida, we've seen above normal precip up to 3 to 5 inches above normal. The only areas that have really seen below normal is right along the coastal Carolinas and almost upstate North Carolina. So really, for this time of year, we've seen above normal rainfall. Now, as I mentioned before, we don't expect usually as much rainfall, so we haven't seen significant flooding. We've seen a little bit of spotty flooding through the Southeast, but not significant flooding, and for the most people that's good news, and that keeps our reservoirs in good shape, which Jeff's going to talk about here in just a second. With all that being said about the above normal rainfall in the Southeast, here's a look at the drought monitor, and this was released this morning. So as you can see, we just have a little bit of abnormally dry over parts of Alabama, Georgia, and then a little bit as we get into Florida, a little bit of moderate drought in very South Florida. But for the most part, we're in pretty good shape, and if we hadn't gotten so much rain in April, we'd see a lot more colors on this graphic. But for now, it looks like we're moving into the summer in pretty good shape.
Taking a look at the reservoirs across the Southeast, looking in North Carolina first, we see Kerr Scott. They're right near their target pool. With the recent heavier rains, we saw their pool just last week get up to 1037 feet, which was 7 feet above their target pool for this time of year, but they are back down. Jordan was up there as well last week, a few feet above their target pool, but they're back down to their guide curve. But overall, lakes at or above their guide curves in North Carolina as we head into May, so pretty good as far as water resources. Going into South Carolina, we see again all the lakes very near their guide curves. On the Savannah, at Hartwell, we see the pool has finally come up near their guide curve after being just below guide curve really most of the year since last summer. The recent rains here in April have helped with this. Lake Murray, Lake Wateree also near their guide curves. Looking in Georgia, all Georgia reservoirs looking good, out above their guide curves. Of course, many of these lakes are increasing their pools to their higher summer levels, and so far plenty of water to be able to do this. Looking at Altoona, Lanier, and W.F. George, all near or above their target pool. And then in Alabama, most of these, again, going to their summer pool levels, and so far tracking well with all current pools near their guide curve. Most of all of them within a half a foot or so from their target pool. And finally, looking at stream flows as a whole, we see pretty much near normal to slightly above normal across the southeast. March was a fairly dry month across the southeast, but April rains have helped recover many streams from their lower March levels, and this should carry us into May.
All right, let's take a look at what we can expect for the next week or so across the southeast. We're going to start the period with an area of low pressure moving across Virginia and North Carolina. But by Saturday, this is going to be to the east of us, and we can expect dry conditions through the rest of the weekend. Even as we get into the midterm period, we're still expecting mostly dry conditions, high pressure across much of the southeast, and light winds aloft. The exception of this will be down in Florida. We are expecting to see an area of low pressure moving eastward over the Florida peninsula. As we get into the end of the midterm period, so closer to Thursday, there's hints in the models that this area of low pressure may deepen some and strengthen, and also looks like there could be another area of low pressure moving in from the west. So for that reason, in the long-term outlook, we're expecting above normal precipitation amounts across much of the southeast, maybe near normal further from those areas of low pressure that the models were hinting at about 7 days out.
Well, thank you, Chris. Now let's look back a little bit about our ENSO. We've been talking about this a lot, and as you can see from the graphic, it shows the red shows when we've been in El Nino years, or when the Pacific temperatures have been warmer than normal, sea surface temperatures, and the blue shows when we've been below normal. And if you look at the far right side, you'll see that since about 2012, we've stayed pretty close to normal for the most part. Only recently, in the last month or so, have we actually had an official El Nino. And it looks like that's probably going to continue. Now, whether it gets into a moderate El Nino and gets into something like what we had similar between 2002 and 2004, where we stay warm for a long period of time, we'll just have to see. But right now, it does look like we'll spend the next at least 9 months or so in that warmer than normal temperature. And the reason I say that is because our forecast currently shows it to continue to warm. In fact, going from just a weak El Nino to maybe a moderate El Nino, and then grazing maybe the strong El Nino as we get into the fall and the winter months. For the summer months, the impact it has is that it tends to dampen the hurricane season, but even at the end of this time frame, it should help conditions and help things, help us with before we get into the true summer. In other words, we will still continue to have some rain like we've had in April, and it'll probably keep us wet. So our May outlook does show some wetness in the Florida area and South Georgia and the panhandle of Florida and so forth. So it does look at least somewhat wet for the month of May, but for the seasonal outlook, May through July, it does look wet. Again, that's a factor that we're seeing from the El Nino, but as we get into more of summer, it has kind of a less of an impact. From a broad scale, and then it tends to dampen the hurricane season. So we'll see how that balances out as we move through into summer, and then next year we'll be concerned about a flood season in the winter. And so the bottom line, in the short term, a little break from our April rain, but it could pick up as we get to mid-May and as we get to the end of May. So the end of the month might end up getting a little bit more busy. As for the long term, yes, we're in a weak El Nino. Will it get stronger? We'll have to see. But right now we're in a weak El Nino, at least through the summer. And the early summer does look wet, but with a hurricane season predicted to be quieter than normal, we'll see how that impacts our rainfall through the rest of the summer. And we'll be able to talk about that in our next Water Resources Outlook, which will be recorded the week of May 26th. Thank you for listening.